The year was 1865. The land was raw, untamed, and without mercy. Beneath a sky painted in the last embers of sunset, Clara Hastings lay motionless in the trampled grass, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Smoke curled upward from what remained her home, dark tendrils stretching toward the heavens, as if clawing for salvation. The scent of burning wood and spilled blood thickened the air. She could hear them still. Hoofbeats retreating into the horizon, the triumphant shouts of men who believed her dead. They had come fast and ruthless, descending upon the homestead with the efficiency of wolves. She hadn't even seen Samuel fall. One moment, her husband had been shouting for her to take Jacob and run, and the next, the world had splintered apart in musket fire. Her eyes flickered open, the weight of dry blood stiff against her skin. Her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. A gash across her thigh pulsed with searing pain, torn open by a blade meant to end her. A boot had slammed into her ribs before the world had gone dark, and now every shallow breath sent pain radiating through her chest. But she was alive. Alive. Jacob. The name tore through her consciousness, dragging her fully into wakefulness. With a desperate sob, Clara pushed up onto her elbows, her hands clawing against the damp earth as she turned toward the smoldering ruins of her cabin. Flames had devoured the wooden walls, leaving little more than a skeletal frame. The door hung at an angle, barely clinging to its hinges, charred black against the ruins. She tried to call for him, but her throat was raw, her voice nothing more than a rasp. She forced herself forward, crawling through the wreckage. The heat bit at her skin as she reached the place where his cradle had been. The blankets were scorched, the wood splintered and broken. No sign of him. A keening wail built in her chest, a mother's grief unrestrained, but she bit it down. Grief had no place here. Not yet. A glint of metal caught her eye. A knife, its handle smooth and worn, had been tossed to the side near the edge of the cabin. Clara grabbed it, fingers tightening around the hilt. It was all she had now, the knife and the clothes on her back. Her wedding ring was gone, stolen from her finger as she lay bleeding in the dirt. She couldn't stay. They thought her dead, and that was the only thing keeping her alive. If they realized their mistake, they would return to finish the job. She forced herself upright, biting down hard as pain lanced through her body. Her leg buckled, but she caught herself against the charred frame of the house. She would not die here. The prairie stretched before her, vast and merciless. Somewhere in the distance, Fort Laramie stood as a beacon of civilization, but it was days away. She had no food, no water, and her wounds would slow her. The bandits had taken everything. No, not everything. They had left her alive, and that was their mistake. With a final glance at the ruins of her life, Clara turned toward the wilderness. She forced one foot forward, then another, her vision swimming. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of smoke and death, but she did not stop. By the time the sun had sunk below the horizon, her body had reached its limits. Her legs gave out, sending her crashing to her knees. She pressed a hand to her side, feeling the sticky warmth of blood seeping through the fabric. Darkness crowded at the edges of her vision. She could not afford to pass out in the open. If the men didn't find her, the wolves would. She forced herself forward, dragging her body toward the shadow of an old oak tree standing alone in the grasslands. It was as far as she could go. Her head fell back against the rough bark, and the last thing she heard before slipping into unconsciousness was the distant sound of hoofbeats. The night was long and unforgiving. Dreams came in flashes. Samuel's laughter, Jacob's tiny hands reaching for her, the sudden crack of gunfire. She woke shivering, her throat dry as sand. Dawn had barely touched the sky when she became aware of another presence. A figure stood nearby, silent as the wind. He was tall, his silhouette sharp against the dim light of morning. His stance was relaxed, yet there was no mistaking the readiness in his posture. A warrior's stance. Clara's fingers closed around the knife. The man did not move. His gaze held hers, dark and unreadable. He was Lakota, that much was clear. The long braids, the deerskin leggings, the way he carried himself as if he were as much a part of the land as the trees and the rivers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Finally, he shifted, his voice quiet but firm. "You are wounded." Clara's grip on the knife tightened. She had been raised to fear men like him. Stories whispered in the quiet of frontier homes, tales of raids, of scalps taken as trophies. Yet he had not attacked. She swallowed hard. "I can manage." A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed his face. He crouched, his hands resting loosely on his knees. "You will die." Her breath caught. There was no malice in his tone, only certainty. He was right. If she stayed here, she would not last another night. But could she trust him? He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small bundle of dried meat. He placed it between them, then sat back, watching her. He was waiting. Clara hesitated. Hunger gnawed at her insides, but she was no fool. Accepting food from a stranger meant acknowledging her weakness. Yet she had no strength left for pride. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough texture of the dried meat. She took a cautious bite, eyes never leaving his. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "You will come," he said simply. She should have refused. She should have stayed beneath that tree and let fate decide. But Clara Hastings had already died once. Whoever she was now, whoever she was becoming, would not make the same mistake. She swallowed the last of the food and met his gaze. "Then let's go." Clara's legs burned with each step, but she kept moving. The warrior walked ahead of her, his pace steady, unhurried. He did not glance back to check if she followed, nor did he offer her any aid. He had given her food, had given her a choice. The rest, it seemed, was up to her. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and prairie grass. The world stretched out in golden hues, untouched by the violence that had shattered her life. The silence between them was thick, unspoken questions settling like dust in the space they shared. He had not told her his name, nor had she given hers. There was something strange about walking behind a man she did not know, with no guarantee of safety. But Clara understood one thing. Alone, she would not survive. So she walked. By midday, the wound in her leg throbbed with a relentless ache. She stumbled once, biting back a cry as pain flared through her body. The warrior finally stopped, turning his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You will rest." It was not a question. Clara bristled at the command, but did not argue. She sank onto a patch of soft earth beneath the sparse shade of a lone tree, stretching her leg out with a grimace. He crouched nearby, retrieving a leather pouch from his belt. Without a word, he unwrapped a strip of cloth and poured water from a small flask onto it before handing it to her. The gesture startled her more than his silence. She took the damp cloth hesitantly and pressed it to her wound. The coolness was a relief against the inflamed skin. The warrior watched, his gaze assessing but not intrusive. "You fought." His voice was deep, measured. It was not a question, but an observation. Clara swallowed hard, her throat still raw from smoke and grief. "I tried." The warrior nodded, as if this answer satisfied him. He removed a bundle of dried roots from his pouch, crushed them between his fingers, and gestured toward her wound. Clara hesitated. What is it? For fever. She should not trust him. She had been told all her life that men like him were savages, that their ways were dangerous, unknowable. And yet she had no other choice. She nodded, allowing him to press the crushed roots against her wound. His fingers were sure and steady, his touch impersonal but careful. "Why help me?" she asked finally. He did not answer at first. When he spoke, his words were slow, deliberate. "You were left to die." A cold shudder rippled through her. "And you need a reason to save me?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. No, she could not tell if that was meant to comfort her or unsettle her further. They did not speak again that afternoon. The warrior led, and Clara followed, step after grueling step. The land stretched before them in endless waves of grass, the occasional rock formation rising from the earth like the bones of the land itself. That night, they made camp beneath a sky thick with stars. The warrior started a fire, his movements efficient, practiced. Clara sat a short distance away, watching him, the way he moved, the way he carried himself. Everything about him was controlled, disciplined. He was unlike any man she had ever known. She did not sleep easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flames consuming her home, heard the screams echoing in her mind. She wondered if he noticed the way her hands trembled when she rubbed warmth into them, if he heard the ragged hitch of her breath when the wind carried distant sounds that reminded her too much of gunfire. If he did, he said nothing. On the second day, Clara's body ached with exhaustion, but she forced herself forward. The warrior did not slow for her, nor did he offer her words of encouragement. But when she stumbled, he did not let her fall. He caught her arm, his grip firm but not cruel, and steadied her before continuing on. They traveled without speaking, moving through the wild as if they were ghosts passing through a world that did not belong to them. Clara found herself studying him when she thought he would not notice. She had known men like her husband, men who worked the land, who dreamed of carving out something of their own in the wilderness. But she had never known a man like this. There was a sharpness to him, but it was not cruel. His silence was not unkind, only patient. By the time the sun began its slow descent, Clara realized something. He was not leading her toward Fort Laramie. She stopped. "Where are we going?" The warrior did not look back. "West. That's not Fort Laramie." "No." Her heart pounded against her ribs. "Then why?" "You would not make it." Clara clenched her fists. "That should be my choice." For the first time since they met, something flickered across his face. Something that might have been amusement. "You are free," he said simply. "Walk east if you wish." She turned her head in the direction from which they'd come. The land stretched empty, vast, unforgiving. Alone, she would not last another night. Her hands trembled at her sides, frustration warring with fear. He was watching her, waiting. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. He studied her for a moment before responding. "Chitin." She let the name settle in the space between them. "Clara." A slow nod. "We leave at dawn." That night, she sat closer to the fire, not beside him, but near enough that the warmth reached her. She did not question him again. The next day, they reached the river. The water was cold and fast-moving, carving a winding path through the prairie. Clara hesitated at the edge. Chayton crossed first, his horse moving through the water with ease. He turned, watching her from the opposite bank. She took a breath, stepping into the icy current. The force of it nearly took her legs out from under her, and she gasped, struggling to keep her footing. The wound in her leg burned with each movement. Halfway across, the current pulled harder. She slipped. The world spun, water rushing around her. She fought, gasping for air, arms flailing against the pull of the river. Then hands, strong, unyielding, grasped her. She was pulled upright, water pouring from her mouth as she coughed, shaking. Chayton's grip on her arms was firm. He did not let go until she was steady on her feet. She met his gaze, breathless, and saw something there, something unreadable, but not unkind. "You are not ready," he said. Clara clenched her teeth. "Then I'll get ready." For the first time, his lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. The journey continued. That night, as they sat by the fire, she watched him through the shifting glow of the flames. "Why were you out there?" she asked. Chayton did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, thoughtful. "War takes everything." She understood. They did not speak again, but the silence between them was different now. She no longer walked behind him. She walked beside him. The wind howled to the open plains, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint musk of unseen animals. The cold had settled in by the time Clara and Chayton left the river behind, their clothes still damp from the crossing. Every step was a test of endurance, each movement a reminder that the wilderness had no mercy for the weak. Clara's legs trembled with exhaustion, her body wrung dry of strength, but she forced herself forward. Chayton set the pace, neither rushing nor slowing, simply moving with the same relentless rhythm that had carried them this far. He had not spoken since pulling her from the river, nor had she. There was nothing to say. Survival was a language all its own. The sky darkened as they reached the shelter of a small rock outcrop. It wasn't much. just enough cover to block the worst of the wind. Clara sank to ground, arms wrapped around herself, shivering as the last light of day faded. Chayton knelt nearby, his hands working with practiced ease as he built a fire. Sparks leapt from the flint, catching on dry kindling. Within moments, the flames licked hungrily at the wood, casting flickering shadows against the stone. Clara edged closer, letting the heat seep into her frozen skin. He glanced at her once, then reached for his pouch, pulling out strips of dried meat. He tossed one toward her. She caught it, hunger overriding hesitation. The first bite was tough, the salt stinging her cracked lips, but she chewed and swallowed without complaint. "You are stronger than you think," he said suddenly. Clara looked up, startled by the words. He had never offered her praise before. "You don't know me," she countered. Chayton studied her across the fire. "I know what I see." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she was just a woman trying to stay alive, that she was only here because she had no choice. But deep down, she knew better. She had chosen this. She could have turned east, tried to find Fort Laramie, thrown herself at the mercy of strangers. But she hadn't. Something had shifted inside her. A coyote howled in the distance, a long, lonely sound that made Clara's skin prickle. Chayton's expression sharpened. Not alone. The realization settled in her gut like a stone. Where there was one, there were others. Chayton stood, gaze scanning the darkness beyond the fire's glow. His hand hovered near his knife. A rustle. Clara stiffened. The hair on the back of her neck rose as shapes shifted in the dark. Low growls, yellow eyes gleaming in the firelight. Wolves. Her breath caught. One padded forward, muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. It was larger than she expected, its body tense with hunger. Chayton moved first. The knife flashed in his hand, his stance unwavering. Clara's heart pounded. She had the small blade he'd given her. But what good was that against a pack of wolves? The lead wolf lunged. Chayton struck fast, meeting the attack with brutal efficiency. The blade sliced deep, a sharp yelp breaking the silence. But the others did not scatter. One of them turned toward Clara. She scrambled backward, pulse hammering. No, she would not die like this. Clenching her knife, she raised it just as the wolf sprang. Pain seared through her arm as it knocked her to ground, claws raking against fabric, teeth snapping inches from her face. The weight of it crushed her chest, its breath hot and foul against her skin. She struck blindly. The blade met flesh. A high-pitched yelp rang out as the wolf recoiled. She scrambled to her knees, chest heaving, vision swimming. Chayton finished the job, his knife a blur. The remaining wolves hesitated, then melted back into the night, shadows retreating into silence. Clara stared at the blood on her hands. Her own, the wolf's. Her breathing came fast and shallow, her body shaking with adrenaline. Chayton knelt beside her, his expression unreadable. He reached for her arm, inspecting the torn fabric, the shallow wound beneath. It wasn't deep, but it stung. You did not freeze. His voice was quiet, yet there was something in his tone. Clara met his gaze. "I killed it." He nodded. A slow, steady exhale left her lips. She hadn't cowered. She hadn't waited for someone to save her. Something inside her had shifted again. That night, sleep did not come easily. She lay close to the fire, the memory of the fight replaying in her mind. Her body ached, but her mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. The next day, she did not wait for Chayton to tell her to move. She rose with the dawn, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs, and began walking. Chayton followed. By mid-morning, the landscape changed. The endless prairie gave way to rolling hills, dense with patches of trees. Clara's stomach twisted with hunger. The dried meat was gone. She hesitated as they came to a small creek, its water clear and running fast over smooth stones. She knelt to drink, the cold liquid soothing her parched throat. Chayton moved a few steps ahead, eyes scanning the brush. He reached for his bow. Clara stilled. A rabbit darted from the grass. The arrow flew swift and silent. It hit its mark. She swallowed hard as Chayton retrieved the animal, his movements effortless, natural. She had seen Samuel hunt before, but there had been something different about it. Clumsy, loud, reliant on bullets. Chayton's way was clean, precise. She watched as he skinned a rabbit with practiced ease, blood staining his fingers, his knife slicing through fur and flesh. "Have you ever killed to eat?" he asked. Clara shook her head. He offered her the knife. The implication was clear. Her stomach turned at the thought, but she took the blade. Chayton watched as she made the first cut. Her hands were unsteady, but she did not stop. By the time the meat was roasting over the fire that evening, Clara felt something strange. Pride. They ate in silence, the smoky scent of cooked meat filling the air. It was the best thing she had tasted in weeks. Afterward, as the fire burned low, Clara turned to Chayton. "What were you before this?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, "A warrior." She studied him, waiting. "My people fought," he continued, "against soldiers, against others, against hunger." Clara understood. The world did not spare anyone. She looked down at her own hands, still stained with the remnants of the rabbit, with the blood of the wolf from a night before. She was not the woman she had been. Her body ached, but she was not broken. Her hands trembled, but they were steady when they needed to be. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of something unfamiliar, a low, rhythmic pounding. Chayton stiffened. Clara's pulse quickened. "What is it?" He listened for a long moment before answering. "Hoofbeats." Clara's breath caught. Riders, not soldiers, not settlers. Something else. The fire crackled between them, sending shadows dancing across their faces. Clara met Chayton's gaze, and for the first time, she was not afraid. The pounding of hooves grew louder, a deep, rolling thunder against the earth. The rhythm was too fast. Too many. Not travelers. Not a hunting party. Something else. Clara's grip tightened around the knife at her waist, her pulse hammering in her throat. Chayton remained still, his head tilted slightly as he listened, his expression carved from stone. Then, without a word, he grabbed his bow, slung it over his shoulder, and reached for his horse's reins. Clara barely had time to react before he caught her wrist and pulled her onto the horse behind him. "Hold," he ordered. She hesitated for a breath, then wrapped her arms around his waist. The horse surged forward, muscles bunching beneath them as they took off into the trees. The wind tore at Clara's hair, the world blurring around them as they wove between the trunks, the scent of pine and damp earth filling her nose. Behind them, the hoofbeats multiplied. Whoever they were, they had seen them. Chayton veered sharply, taking them down a steep incline. The ground was treacherous, rocks hidden beneath the undergrowth. Clara gritted her teeth, holding tight as the horse stumbled but kept its footing. Then voices, shouts distant but closing in. She recognized them. A cold, familiar dread curled in her gut. The men who had left her for dead. Clara's breath came fast and shallow. She could hear their laughter in her memories, the way they had torn her life apart without a second thought, and now they were hunting her again. Chayton slowed the horse near a rocky overhang, dismounting in one smooth motion. He pulled Clara down beside him, pressing her into the shadows. She barely had time to catch her breath before he handed her his knife. "Use it if you must." There was no fear in his voice, only certainty. Clara clenched the handle, her knuckles white. Through the trees, the riders came into view. 5 of them, their faces partially obscured by the dying light. But she knew them. The leader sat tall in his saddle, his coat stained with dust and old blood. His eyes swept the area, sharp and calculating. She knew that gaze. She had felt it before. "Come out," he called, his voice lazy, confident. "Ain't no use running. We know you're here." Chayton didn't move. Neither did Clara. The leader smirked, swinging down from his horse. He was in no hurry. The others followed, fanning out, boots crushed leaves and twigs, weapons glinting in the last light of day. Clara's fingers trembled around the knife. Her heart thundered in her chest, a war between terror and something else, something colder. Chayton's body was coiled beside her, his breath steady. A predator waiting for the right moment. The leader took another step forward, turning slightly, just enough for the firelight to catch his face. And suddenly, Claire was back in the ruins of her home. Smoke thick in the air, Jacob's cradle overturned, Samuel's blood soaking into the dirt. This man had done that. Laughter, gunfire, the weight of a boot crushing her ribs. She had been weak then. Not now. Something inside her snapped, sharp as steel. Before she even realized she was moving, she was standing. The leader's eyes widened in surprise, his grin faltering. Well, he drawled. Look who ain't dead after all. Clara's grip tightened on the knife. He laughed, shaking his head. Should have made sure, I suppose. His gaze flicked to Chayton. And look at you now, running with the savages. Clara's voice was steady when she spoke. You killed my husband. You took my son. The man sighed, almost bored. Sweetheart, I don't even remember. Rage burned through her veins. He didn't even remember. To him, they had been nothing. A homestead to burn, a family to slaughter, a woman to discard. Chayton moved then. Silent, swift. An arrow notched, released. One of the men staggered, a choked sound escaping his lips before he crumpled. Chaos erupted. Gunfire split the air. Clara dove to the side, rolling behind the outcrop as bullets ripped through bark and stone. Chayton moved like a shadow, fast and precise. Another arrow flew, striking its mark. The leader cursed, drawing his revolver. Kill them both. One of the men rushed toward Clara. She didn't think. She acted. The knife met flesh. The man grunted, eyes wide with shock as blood blossomed across his shirt. He fell to his knees, gasping. Clara didn't look away. The leader was on her in an instant, his hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her forward. The knife slipped from her grasp. Feisty thing, he sneered, dragging her close. Shame we didn't have more fun the first time. Clara didn't flinch. She slammed her knee up, hard. The leader cursed, staggering back. Chayton was there before he could recover. The blade flashed once. Then it was over. The leader's body crumpled, eyes wide in shock as he clutched his throat, blood spilling between his fingers. Silence. Clara stood motionless, breath ragged. The others were dead. It was done. For a long moment, neither she nor Chayton spoke. The wind whispered through the trees, the fire crackling softly in the distance. Clara looked down at her hands. The knife slick with blood. She had done this. She had survived. Chayton watched her, unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You are not the same woman. Clara exhaled, slow and steady. No, she said. I'm not. She turned her gaze west, where the horizon stretched into the unknown. She did not look back.